John here with a short missive on the Capricorn Solstice 2023. Well, you know, YouTube algorithms demand that it be at least 10 minutes long, so it won't be that short. We're going to talk about what solstices are. We're going to talk about this solstice and then have a look at where this solstice lands in the world. That's always a helpful thing to do with a solstice. So this is the Capricorn solstice, which means that the sun leaves Sagittarius and goes into the sign of Capricorn. This is the beginning of winter if you're in the northern hemisphere, and for our friends who are in the southern hemisphere in Australia, southern Africa, and the southern parts of South America and Micronesia and a few other places, Antarctica if you're watching. This is the summer solstice. You'll excuse me if I focus mostly on the northern hemisphere and the winter solstice. After all, those of you down south, it's summertime and you don't really need that much. You know, we need a little extra help over here. And in fact, it is the darkest day of the year in the northern hemisphere. The sun barely makes a showing around this time of year. The sun will rise south of east. Sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The sun rises south of east and makes a low arc in the sky and then ends south of west, sets very far south of west. If you want a really good experiment to do, it's easy to do, is go out on the morning of the winter solstice or the next morning. In this case, the winter solstice, I should say, is at 10:27 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That would be 7:27 p.m. Pacific Time. That would be 3:27 a.m. UK and Ireland, and the rest of you guys can figure it out for yourselves. You guys are good at that if you're anyplace else. So it doesn't matter if you go out on Thursday morning or Friday morning. The sun doesn't change very much, actually, its position around the solstices. It's different from the equinoxes where the sun actually changes position fairly rapidly. There's not much change that is happening right around the solstice, so you have a little bit of time. But one of these mornings you go out and you look and see where the sun rises, and you'll see that it rises not due west. If you have a little compass on your phone or something like that, you can see that it's rising fairly south of west. And then go out at noon and you'll see that the sun is pretty low in the sky. It's not up ahead as it would be in the summertime. And then more likely than getting up to watch the sunrise, although sunrise is pretty late these days, the sun will set in the west, and you'll see that it sets very far south of west. Now, just hold that in your head. Just hold that in the head. Watch where the sun sets and hold it in your head, or where it rises, you know. So the sun will rise over the Foley's house, the chimney on the Foley's house on the solstice, on the winter solstice. And this may not be true for you. And in fact, the Foleys no longer live in that house, but it's always the Foley's house to me. It to the south and west is where it's going to rise on the Capricorn solstice. Barely gets up in the sky, and as I said, it sets very far south of west. Hold that in your mind, and then come out on March 21st around the equinox, and you'll see that the sun rises much, much farther north. It rises pretty close to due east, as close to due east as it's going to get at any rate. And it goes fairly high in the sky, and then it sets fairly close to due west. It rises over the Picciano's house. Piccianos haven't lived there for decades, but it rises over the Picciano's house and then sits on the other side. And then, holding this thought in your mind, go out on the summer solstice, and you'll see that the sun rises north of east. It actually rises in the northeast. This is what actually creates the points of the tropical zodiac. The zodiac that we use. This is the cardinal points, right? So we're seeing the sun enter Capricorn now at the winter solstice. In the springtime, it enters Aries. In the summer, it enters Cancer. and then it enters Libra at the autumnal equinox, right? So this is where we make the 4 points that are the cardinal points of the zodiac. That's exactly what we're basing the zodiac on. Okay, so it's going to be a dark day. In case you, that's the takeaway. I apologize for dragging you through that, but I'm sure we'll get to 10 minutes this way. Okay, so it's very far to the south. The sun barely makes a showing during the day, and the best part about this is that the sun will, when you get to the very bottom of something, when it hits rock bottom, and kind of coincidentally, Capricorn is the sign that we would associate with rocks, but that is coincidental. When the sun hits rock bottom, there's no place to go but up. And so coming forward from these days, the sunlight will gradually increase until we get, until the sun makes his way a little bit more east, a little bit more east and a little less south, climbs northward, we should say. As the sun climbs northward over the course of the year towards the Capricorn, towards the Cancer solstice. So it's a big turning point. It's the darkest day of the year. And this is the time of year when we bring out our own lights, right? The sun is not really giving us a lot of light to work with. We got to do things on our own. Hence, we have Christmas lights. We have Hanukkah, the festival of lights. We have Kwanzaa lights, right? We're bringing lights. We're bringing our own lights. Even not very far from the solstice, we have New Year's Eve. And I know New Year's Eve in Times Square, there's the big ball of crystal light that, we're in the middle of the night, right? And I know Australia, they do fireworks, lots of places they do fireworks. We're bringing our own light at this time of the year. Again, if you're in down under or something like that, it's probably not such a priority for you, and I get that. It's a nice summer evening, and you should have some fireworks. So you don't need it the way we do up here. So this is the time of year when we bring our own light, but we're celebrating the return of the light after this. It has gotten progressively darker. Now it is going to start getting progressively lighter. The sun is growing. It's like the sun has been born. And in fact, we tie our Christmas day, the day of Jesus's birth, which is, historically unknown, we tie it to the ancient holiday that was the birthday of Mithra, the sun god, right? Because this is the beginning of the growth of Mithra, the beginning of the growth of the sun. So that's what the solstice is, and the feel to the solstice is one of, we've hit the lowest point and now things are going to start to grow. It is no coincidence that we put the new year fairly close to the solstice and Christmas fairly close to the solstice. They're not it has a lot to do with the way calendars are made, and has a lot to do with the calendar shift that happened in the 1700s. But I mean, essentially, we're looking at this return of the light. It's an important point. It's the midnight of the year. If you want to make an analogy between the year and a day, which in astrology we do, and it's like the new moon, if you want to make an analogy between the year and a month, right? These are the dark periods, but always after the darkest period, you have growth. It's just a point to notice in the course of the year. It's a point, yeah, I would think that, all of what we do for January and this time of year, there's a sort of reckoning with the past and looking forward towards the future. Very, very appropriate for the solstice. This solstice, we have some interesting aspects on tap. For one, Venus is opposite Uranus, and that suggests a bit of it suggests breaking up tradition. It suggests doing things a different way when it comes to socializing, certainly when it comes to romance and other Venusian activities, but socializing, aesthetics. It's a real sense of like you want to get a bit of fresh air in. And this aspect just happens to be exact on the same day. But the thing about the solstice is that whatever happens on that day is kind of encoded for the next 3 to 6 months, certainly for the next 3 months, and then going forward to the next 6 months. So there's a little bit of a vibe of like wanting some fresh air, wanting to change things up, wanting to do things a little bit differently, want to go have some fun, but in a different way than we usually do, not necessarily the same routine type of thing. And that's a theme for the next 3 months. The moon will be at 0 degrees Taurus, exactly trine in a very, very harmonious relationship and growing, a waxing moon growing at the moment of the solstice. And that suggests, I mean, certainly that Taurus energy, that Taurus is the Venus sign, and Jupiter and Uranus are both in Taurus. So again, there's this sense of a need for change, refreshing, enjoying ourselves. That's an important part of the thing. I would say that there could be some surprises in the area of like world finances and things like that. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with things like cryptocurrencies over the course of the next 3 months, particularly. Um, but generally speaking, I think we're looking at a good vibe for this particular celestial event. And it's just one of many. It sets the tone for the collective. There's not, it's not like I could say a lot, this is great if you're if you're a Libra, this means, or if you're a Leo, this means. It's not really that kind of thing. It really is very much about the collective. So, what would really help would be if we take a look at what's going on in the world, or rather, where is going on in the world? Where does this particular event sort of make an extra impression? So here we have a map of where the sun is rising, where it is setting, where it is directly overhead, and where it is directly below. So on the IC, we would say in astrology, but if you were to do the proverbial digging for China, if you were to just dig straight down, you would get to the sun in these places. I've also put in the nodes of the moon because the moon and the sun are in a nice harmonious relationship. The nodes of the moon are often, they're kind of significant because they are the point where the sun and the moon orbits cross each other. So there you go. Anyway, the sun we're looking at the rising and setting line over here. And you can see that it has set over the Pacific Ocean, and it just touches the tip of Antarctica. That's not, it goes kind of near Hawaii for a little bit. And then it comes up rising through, and like I say, this, when the sun is rising at the solstice is maybe one of the points that I would most be interested in. It comes through Cape Town, South Africa, then it comes across through the Horn of Africa, goes very close to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Tehran in Iran, before going through the stands, the Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, and then finally through Western Russia, coming out at the top. So I mean, I would think, any one of those places, certainly the Middle Eastern places are very likely to catch our interest anyway. There's not really, you don't need much in the way of astrology for that. I would keep an eye maybe on seeing if anything happens of interest in South Africa. The sun is below, that is on the bottom, through Brazil and sort of lopping off this end of South America. It has it's easy for me to say, every event over the course of the last year or so has figured very prominently with Brazil, and they have had a very interesting time of it, but we'll have to see. It also touches St. John's up in the maritime provinces of Canada. And it was actually 6 months ago that that area was very prominent with the loss of the Titania. That was a big news story for a while back then. The sun is directly overhead through the Korean Peninsula, though. It comes through the far eastern part of China, through the Korean Peninsula, and then down through, goes through Indonesia. It just barely misses the Philippines, but it goes through Indonesia, the islands of Indonesia, though. It's far away from the capital and so on. And then down here through Western Australia, just, you know, just slicing off that piece of it and not particularly close to any major cities, which, when it comes to where the interest is going to happen, perhaps you don't want that much interest in your neighborhood. So it seems to have at least missed the major cities of Western Australia. This line, I would say the most important thing to pay attention to is the Korean Peninsula and the sea between China and Japan there. That is where I would probably see the greatest potential for there being something to say. Again, we're looking for things that might be a little bit new. We also have the nodal line. It goes down through Seattle and San Francisco in the US. And other than that, the nodal lines kind of miss just about everything, except this nodal line does, in fact, go through the far eastern coast of Australia. It goes through Brisbane and very close to Sydney and the other coastal cities. Again, it kind of sort of pulls Australia into the mix a little bit more than you might think. Of course, we hear from Australia quite frequently and all that. All right. So there you have it. You know what the solstice is about. You know some special things about this solstice. Again, we're encoding this sort of Uranian, Venusian freedom into the next 3 to 6 months. And we may be looking at things like some, I would not think necessarily negative, but certainly important financial things happening over the course of the next few months. And we know now the areas where the solstice is most prominent. How's it going to play out? Well, we're going to have to wait and see, won't we?